Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode 86, When to Use Svelte. Hopefully I said that right. This is Mike's episode. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Curran. If you've been enjoying the podcast so far and you want to support us, there's a couple of ways that you could do that. You can review us on that Apple podcast or on the podcast platform that you're listening to this on. You can also check us out on that Patreon. We only got a couple of tiers, but the $3 tier will give you a shout out in the podcast, and we will share a link to your website in our show notes. And probably the most important one is just to tell your friends or anyone else that you were here and ready to be listened to. And if you or your friends want to go a step further, you can come check us out on our Discord server and come hang out, chat with a bunch of different developers from all different experience levels. We're talking about movies. We're talking about off-topic stuff. We're talking about Svelte, I guess. We're talking about Webflow. We're talking about a whole bunch of stuff. So come on down, stretch your PHP muscles. I was hoping that would be a little smoother and get learning, I guess. Get learnt, as Ricky says from the Trailer Park Boys. But anyway, Mike, weekly pain point, please take it away.
All right. With what's going on in the world right now, there's a lot of weekly pain points, but I'm going to pick a couple here, which is just feeling anxious a little bit and future planning. I think future planning is probably the biggest one for a lot of people right now. Like, how do you financially plan when all this uncertainty is going on, when there's a bunch of layoffs? Like, I'm sure almost everyone has been affected financially in one way or another, I would say. So how do you future plan with that? No one knows when this is going to be over, which is also really weird. Specifically, if you're listening to this a lot later, we're talking about the coronavirus pandemic. COVID-19, which is weird to think of in the future, actually. There might be, people listening to this a year down the line where this isn't even a big deal anymore, and hopefully
this will be like our grandparents or possibly great-grandparents, depending, when they were talking about the 30s and how they lived through like a really, really bad depression.
Yeah. And like, even if I listened to this a little while ago and hear like the anxious voice that I have and the weird thoughts that I'm having, I might laugh at it, hopefully. But one
of the things that's the scariest though is the uncertainty, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, we don't know, and it's weird. It's weird to be in the situation where we have a little bit of an idea because China's starting to come out of it. As far as we know, again, we're getting probably filtered messaging from there to a certain degree. And Italy's maybe not recovering, but slowing down to a certain degree. So we have some indicators of this stopping or ending, or at least getting beaten a little bit. But we're also not sure if any of that is real, like if any of that is true, if any of that can be prolonged. Like, is it going to come back? Those are the kinds of questions that I'm asking myself all the time. Like, is this going to be, maybe another couple months? Is this going to be, 6 months? Whatever. Like, I don't know. I have no idea. And that's where my anxiety and my inability to future plan is kind of coming from. And that's my pain point this week.
Well, my weekly pain point is similar. It is more or less future planning. We are planning on what the fallout of all this is going to be. So we're lucky enough to be in an industry where we already worked from home. It's already equipped to do that for anyone that did go to any sort of office. So, we're working online on websites, so the website is remote. That's just the way it is. So we're lucky enough to do that. We've noticed some clients, take back or like be more conservative with their money and not want to do stuff. And we have others that now they're sitting around, they want to do more. So it's kind of a weird balance, and we're doing okay that way. So we're lucky enough in that regard. But it's definitely the unknown stuff. One of the scariest things, I think, is there's a lot of conflicting opinions out there. Like, I've read an opinion where someone's like, well, everyone's just going to get this. That's just the way it is. But then when you look at worldwide numbers, you don't even have worldwide numbers at the amount of one Chinese city. And if China is indeed coming out of this, then me as a non-medical outsider and just logicking through would think, well, then isn't it still like a low % chance of us getting it, assuming we do what our governments say, like social distancing and stuff? Like, if I'm stuck in this house all week and I only go and like get vitals and, see minimal people and, just do that stuff. Like, I'm not going to restaurants and stuff. Am I safe? I think that was I think today and yet last night was the first time I started questioning the illness itself. I was more worried about the economic and the everything else before, but now it's a question of, am we going to have a couple of deaths in the family because of this? Is this a statistically probable thing? I don't know. And so I don't know.
My thing is that the numbers that we see right now in the news, we don't know if those are correct because the testing isn't there yet. And second of all, what we're doing right now is not stopping us from getting the disease. It's only delaying the system so that the healthcare system has time to adapt, get all the masks they need, get all the ventilators they need, so that when and if it ever becomes a bigger problem, they're able to solve it.
Yeah,
it is a big problem. It's just flattening the curve. So deaths in the family and stuff, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Worry, but don't worry too much about that. As long as you're following the right principles, everyone should be social distancing and that's what this is supposed to avoid. It's supposed to limit the amount of deaths. It's supposed to limit those decisions that doctors have to make to put one person on a ventilator and not put another person on a ventilator. That's what we're doing. That's what this is. And once we get past that process, and if hopefully the hospitals catch up and the healthcare catches up, it won't be as deadly of a disease as the numbers say right now. So that's the goal. We don't want people to die. I think that's everyone. No one wants to die.
Yeah.
And that's what we got to stop. At any sort, financial circumstances aside, that's what we have to do. So I hope you're right, though, Matt. That's my biggest thing is, out of all this, I really hope you're right, and not everyone gets it. And I hope, who knows, maybe a vaccine will be available in a few months.
Well, they've already, 12 to 18 months, they put one into trials, so it's already in human trials.
Exactly. But these are different circumstances. Everything is different right now. So all the book that has been created,
if this works in 6 months, they might be like, fuck this, we got to put this out there.
That's what I mean.
You might lose a leg, but you won't die or something crazy.
If that's the case, then that's the case. So who knows? Let's just hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's kind of my motto.
Also, I would say this helped me a lot yesterday was my headache finally went away. I had a headache for a long time, and it kept getting worse. And that was due to this, though. 100% due to stress. Because I'd sleep fine, wake up fine, read an article, have a headache immediately. Yeah. What I've started doing is I'm just listening to in our case, I'm listening to the Canadian government and their website. I've started to stop reading articles. So I didn't read any articles or anything yesterday. And then other than the official one, like I said, the official government one. And then I went and I watched like an idiot. I watched 3 or 4 videos, and there were people laying people off and crying, and people talking about Great Depressions and how we'll never get out of this, and how everyone's going to be sick, and how people say they're going to get sick, and they don't care about that. They're just waiting to get sick. And oh yeah, that's what I was watching last night before bed. So that was a good bedtime rule. And then I went and played Animal Crossing to calm down. So that was good. But I think the main thing is if the government tells us to social distance and that's our instruction, then I think we just need to nose to the grindstone, work where we can, do whatever our official health officials say, and that's it. Because they have the main plan and we're just cogs in the plan. They know what's going on. That's just it. Be vigilant, do whatever the government says to do, wash your hands, whatever. And I think that's the best way to do it. Because I actually don't have a headache today because I didn't read any articles. So
nice. That's
good. I noticed that quite a few people actually started getting a headache like me. I learned that the other day. It was just people just going crazy. But anyway, enough about the coronavirus. I'm sure we've all heard enough about it at this point. On to Svelte, I guess. So Mike, this is a Mike heavy episode. Please, sir, take it away.
Okay. So segment number 1 here is what is Svelte. So let's talk technical a little bit here. So I spent a couple days just learning Svelte, doing a few small projects, watching a few videos on it, delving into its infrastructure, going through its plugins, stuff like that. I did do a pretty deep dive into it. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any way whatsoever. I'm not going to build a massive project in it just to talk about it. I'm not going to go too deep into its technical aspects as well. I'm just going to be kind of giving you an overview of what I understand it is. and some other things like just to break down the segments a little bit. We're going to talk why you want to choose Svelte instead of other frameworks, and also when isn't a good time to use Svelte. So starting with the first thing is, what is it? So VueJS, ReactJS, and Angular are all frameworks that are meant for reactive web apps. Svelte actually, which actually apparently stands for Cybernetically Enhanced Web Apps. Not stands for, but that's what their slogan is. Not a huge fan of that slogan.
Cybernetically Enhanced Web Apps.
I really don't like that slogan because it
sounds like our version of Skynet.
Yeah, doesn't it? Why would they do that? Why is it cybernetically enhanced? Anyway, that's what they're going with. That's on their main site for some reason, whatever. It's actually a compiler, not a framework in the traditional sense. So the difference here is that the compiler solves a similar problem. So what React, Vue, and Angular do is allow you to build reactive websites where if data is changed, the UI on the website is also changed with the data change. So if there's an input that changes a piece of data, something like a number will change on the site, and that's all linked together through this reactive framework. Whereas Svelte actually compiles everything into a just basic JavaScript, HTML, and CSS files, which automatically manipulate the DOM. So Svelte actually does not utilize a virtual DOM the same way that everyone else does. So Vue.js, React, and Angular all have a virtual DOM, which essentially mimics the real DOM. And whenever a change is made to the virtual DOM, it will compare it to what's in the real DOM. And if there's a difference, then it'll switch it. That's how the virtual DOM works. Whereas Svelte will actually just straight up manipulate the DOM without any middle layer. And it'll do its comparisons and stuff, but it won't compare it to an entirely created virtual DOM. It'll just compare it to the local code, like the local variable that it's stored in. So when you're reading Svelte code, the compiled Svelte code, it's actually very human readable. It's pretty logical when it compiles down. Whereas when you're reading something like React or Vue.js code that's been compiled, it's a lot more complex, and it would be near impossible to understand what's going on in a compiled Vue.js or React.js app. So those are the major differences between Svelte and Vue. And because of the fact that it is a compiler instead of a whole framework built into it, Svelte's package size, when it actually creates a website from its code, is very small compared to all the other competition. It doesn't package anything it doesn't need. It's also extremely lean, and I'll talk about that in the next section too. It's very bare bones essentially. What it has in it is essentially the ability to link a variable to a piece of DOM manipulatable content, so to a div, like a variable, like a variable A is equal to 1, and then you can display that variable A inside of your DOM in template format. And then when something happens to that variable, like let's say you add a number to that variable, so if A is equal to 1, you do an A++, that makes it 2, that code will then automatically execute and update the DOM to show it in the HTML. That's all that's packaged into Svelte, essentially. Those kinds of things. So it still has the basic infrastructure of a reactive component. So everything's component based. You have your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in a component. All the CSS is still scoped, which means that when you write CSS, you can write CSS even for like a regular tag, like an H1 tag or a div tag or a whatever, and it'll only affect that component, whatever you're writing in. You can have multiple components, you can still import them into a major component and stuff like that. All the basic infrastructure of a JavaScript framework is in place, but only the basic stuff. For instance, anything to do with routing and anything to do with state management, that's external, which means that you're either building it yourself or you're using a package that has it built into it. So you're depending on someone else for that. Could be good or bad. Again, we'll discuss it a little bit later. The syntax also is very, very similar in Svelte to all the other frameworks, but it's a lot simpler to understand because it's using just essentially vanilla JavaScript with a few added extra words, essentially. That's all it is. When you're writing a function, you're just declaring it just like you would a vanilla JavaScript function. And when you're executing that function, in the DOM, like if you want to add an on-click listener, it's a little bit different where you have to, set it to a specific Svelte framework code word, which is like on : and then the function name to a button. It's very simple to understand. I would say it's a little bit simpler than Vue. I'm going to compare most of my knowledge of Svelte to Vue knowledge. And because I'm way more familiar with Vue than React, I have used React a couple times, but I'll stick to Vue. But know that all these comparisons will be very similar to the other frameworks. Like when I compare it to Vue, I'm essentially comparing it to React and Angular as well, because those three are a little bit closer than Svelte is to the rest of them. That's all I have to say.
Well, I have a
yeah.
question then. So
Go
this,
ahead.
as a person that's only heard the name and never actually used it, so I'm sure there's a couple of newbies in the audience that are not sure what the heck is going on. So one of my questions then, as a newbie as well, is what is like Svelte its own language? Because you're mentioning it's a compiler that is it just a compiler that is working with VueJS and React and Angular, or like how does Svelte fit in to this like puzzle at a high end, like at a high level?
It is not its own language, and it doesn't work with Vue, React, or Angular. You can technically use both at the same time, but and
they
I'm
are
sure
separate.
they're very separate. Yeah,
Okay.
they're essentially solving the same problem.
Okay.
They're solving the same problem. They're not separate languages. It just has its own syntax. So it has its own keywords that you can use to do some stuff in Svelte. Its own link, like the way it handles reactivity is a separate kind of syntax that you have to learn. But their website, their documentation is pretty good for that, I would have to say. Again, I prefer VueJS's documentation a little bit more, personally. Right. I think their tutorials and their just straight up documentation, their API documentation is a little bit more clear. But Svelte is also really good in that sense.
And okay, so then follow up question then. So like obviously, so for example, VueJS, ReactJS are obviously not their own languages, but they're both JS using their own keywords, and in React's case, it's usually JSX, stuff like that. So this is just like React. This is just like using JS in a different way. It's like just like JSX, where it has its own Svelte SX, if you will.
Exactly. So React is .jsx, right? Files.
Yeah.
And Svelte is .svelte, and Vue is .vue.
But it's still all JS at the end of the day.
It's still all JS in the end. Yes.
Okay.
And it compiles down to, again, JS as well. So you're writing JS, compiles to JS. That's all pretty straightforward. Just the way it handles, for instance, on created events, like on load, that kind of stuff is a little bit different in all the different frameworks. But essentially everything else is very similar. So the main things that you have to learn are how reactivity works in each one. So how you actually link that, var a equals 1 to a template in the HTML. So div, how you would use that template syntax. It's essentially like handlebars or mustache, if you know that.
Yeah.
It uses very similar formatting, so you should be familiar with it. If you're ever done any sort of templating in HTML, like there's different templating languages in HTML. They're all very similar. They just use handlebars, most of them. Some use 2 handlebars, some use 1, etc. So this one uses 1. Svelte uses a 1 handlebar kind of method, where 1 on one side, 1 on the other, and the code that you want is in the middle. So that's about it. I don't know if you have anything else, Matt.
No, I think it kind of makes sense. So I'll just like basically you write in Svelte files, like in your Svelte files with their JSX like. I'm just comparing it for people that have used other languages, so they have their own syntax, just like how JSX has its own syntax with ReactJS. And then the compiler quite literally is essentially a translator, in layman terms, that translates the Svelte syntax into straight up JS so that the browser can read, obviously, the files, because the browsers don't read Svelte files.
Exactly.
Right.
That's exactly it.
Now, where would you use this? Like, where you're saying ReactiveX, but like, is there a benefit here where you could maybe use this? Like, I know I think you mentioned in a previous episode that you can't really use ReactJS, for example, with Cordova and stuff like that. Is this a very appable if you will. And this is a very applicable way to do it.
So that's a perfect segue into segment number 2.
Oh, okay.
Why choose Svelte instead of the other frameworks? Or why choose Svelte at all? I'll talk about both of them. So just because Svelte is a new and shiny thing doesn't mean it immediately replaces all the other older, more established frameworks. But it also doesn't mean that there's no room in the market for it. There is room, and it can be very beneficial for a lot of workflows. So I'm just going to mention a few of them. There's way more, but big thing with Svelte, again, like I mentioned before, is the package size. So compared to React, compared to Vue, the final package, the final HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files are very small. And because of that, the performance and the speed of Svelte is sometimes quicker, depending on what you're doing. So because of that, if size of your website is ever a important thing, like if you're sitting down, you're like, we need this site to be as small as possible for whatever reason. One of the reasons that I can think of is if you're working on a website that's only going to be serving, or mostly going to be serving, low power emerging markets that like barely have access to, phones or computers that are like 10 years old, stuff like that. Emerging markets where power is very expensive, where like you don't know what kind of device they're going to have. So if you're going to have that kind of situation, I can see Svelte being powerful. And if you still need reactive technologies and stuff like that, if you're still making a web app, then I can see Svelte being important and Svelte being considered as a possible solution to a problem. Okay. So also, if you're looking for something simple to dive into, so if you're a new developer and you just learned JavaScript, HTML, CSS, I think it's once you have that base core, it is important to go out and look at reactive frameworks like Vue and all that. And if you just learned it and you just want to dive into something quickly, Svelte is a good stepping stone in my opinion. And Svelte has a lot of features that if you were to understand them very well, you can very easily take that knowledge and use it for any of the other frameworks. Right? And in my opinion, there is something to be said about learning in Svelte. It might be a little bit easier than learning Vue or React because the restrictions that you have in Svelte are much lower, and the code that you're writing in Svelte is much more in parallel to vanilla JavaScript. So when you know vanilla JavaScript, you're kind of like when you're writing functions, you're essentially writing vanilla JavaScript functions in Svelte. Whereas with Vue, you still have to take consideration a lot of keywords, a lot of lifecycle events. Like Java in Vue, functions are called methods, and methods can be created, but then you have to use them in different life cycles. So, or use them in the actual HTML as event listeners. So it requires a couple of different steps that you have to take. Whereas with Svelte, you can just write a function and then use it right away in that compile in the script tags as you would a regular function in JavaScript. So it's a little bit easier to understand. So for learning purposes, I think Svelte is a good stepping stone, and it gives you access to DOM manipulation. So that's one thing. And the other thing I think that is important, and a lot of people do want to do this, is if you want to create your own infrastructure, like if you want to have something that's powerful and then build on top of that, like one use case of this is if you're a very highly security-driven company, and you don't want to use something that's been pre-built, right? But you still need a good base for all of your infrastructure. I think Svelte could be a really good base because it has good documentation. It has very solid code written. And if you want to create your own state management library, it has the tools for you to create your own state management library. If you want to create your own routing library, it has the tools for you to create your own routing library. So you can create all of that yourself, your own security, your own, authentication protocols. You can create all that for Svelte as a package just privately in your own company. So I think there is something to be said about that purpose, like over top of React, because React is built on top of React is built by Facebook. So if you're a security conscious company, you might be hesitant to go to React. Vue, it is built open source. It is built by a lot of people, but all these packages are already kind of implemented in Vue. So you have a first-party router, a first-party state management. You could technically build on top of that as well, but it has a lot in there that you probably don't need if you're in that scenario. And in my opinion, Svelte would be a good step in that direction, where if you just take Svelte and then build on top of it, you can create a very powerful platform for yourself and your company.
Can you, for the beginner out there again, can you describe what a router is and what the what was the other thing? State management is?
State management.
And could you like give an example, like possibly a use case for each?
Yes. So a router is just your basic routing, like link hrefs. So if you want to have multiple pages with components, you have to somehow tell the component that it's going to switch between one component and another component. And then you also have to make it so that the browser understands that you're routing. Because for SEO purposes, for creating site maps and stuff like that, you want to have native functionality. So you don't want it to just quickly switch on the screen most times. You want it to actually show a route in your URL bar, for instance. That's what a router does. So a router will do all that logic for you, and you'll essentially be putting in very similar to href style routing, like a navbar, like slash about, slash contact and stuff like that. And then the router will handle the actual component switching and the URL and all that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So that's a router.
Okay, yeah.
Because natively, otherwise you would have to do it yourself, and then you would have to manage the URL bar and everything else yourself, and pass information, props and stuff between them. Now, state management brings in another thing where, let's say you have an application that has a shopping cart, right? You have to keep track of what's in the shopping cart. Now, to do that with multiple components, you would have to either pass information from one component to another component and then pass that information to another component as it's going by. You would have to keep passing information. It's all doable, but it could get really complex. What a state management library does, for Vue, it's Vuex. For React, it's you know what? I can't remember. But regardless, it's a state management library. If you just Google that, you'll get it. But what a state management library does is it gives you a central place where you can store all the information that's going to be shared by components.
Okay.
And when that information is updated, it gives you the ability to automatically update those components.
So for example, if someone was logged in, even.
Yes, correct.
So your admin bar would show up.
Exactly. It would check the state, the store that the state management library is managing.
Yeah.
And would automatically display that admin bar if it sees that you're logged in. Or if you go to a different page on your site and you need to display the price, then it would check your state management library that you've been updating the price in, and it'll show that price without you having to explicitly pass that information back and forth between the components that need it.
Right.
So it's just essentially like a store where you can keep a bunch of your stuff.
Almost like where people would put stuff in a global variable or something.
Exactly. It allows you to use kind of a global state, but it also is very intentional where you're not going to be accidentally, overwriting things.
Right.
So that's the point of the thing, is so that you don't use global variables, so that you actually, when you're writing something to a state management thing, you're actually committing it, and then you're mutating it. So you're doing multiple very intentional steps to make sure that you're not accidentally doing something.
Yes, yeah.
In a larger library, when you have a bigger team, it's very important to have that kind of infrastructure in place. Otherwise, with these global variables, one thing could be writing it at the same time, another thing could be writing it at the same time, another thing could be writing it. All that creates this disaster. Yeah, so that's about it for why you would choose Svelte, in my eyes. There are plenty of other reasons, I'm sure, and let us know on the socials. Let us know in the Discord, anywhere. If you use Svelte, what you've used it for. If you think it's better, let us know, because I'm complete. I can change my mind and add more stuff to this and all that. But let's go on to segment number 3. Is when is it not a good time to use Svelte? So if you already have a framework in place, like Vue or React, like let's say your project is already underway, you've gone to a certain step with it, you have a bunch of stuff in place, and all of a sudden Svelte comes in on the market and you're like, oh, a shiny new toy. in my eyes, there's no real reason for you to switch to it. Like, you shouldn't be switching from an already established framework like Vue or React to Svelte, because feature-wise, they're very, very similar. Like, anything that you can do in Svelte, you can definitely do in Vue or React, and more. And I'll get to that. When you have a larger team and you don't want to build every single additional feature, like I was saying before, where maybe you are of that mindset where you want to build every feature on top of your framework because you want to have it privately and stuff like that. But most of the time, you don't want to do that because it's very costly, very time consuming, and it also is highly prone to errors, highly prone to issues. So, but if you're in a team that doesn't want to do that, Svelte isn't really for you because it doesn't have a great package list. It doesn't have that many libraries. It doesn't have that much built into it. It's very bare bone. Like, it's essentially like, this is what you get. You get something that has reactivity in it. And that's it. Like, you can manipulate data, and that data will automatically be updated in your HTML. That's what you're getting with Svelte. And if that's not enough for you, then you're going to have to use a third-party thing. You're going to have to build it yourself. That's it. So if you're in a team that needs many different pieces of functionality, in my eyes, Svelte's not there yet. I don't know. It probably will get there where the first part, like where plugins will become really mature. But again, it doesn't have any first-party plugins. It's essentially only the library. So Vue has a first-party router and a first-party state management plugin built by the Vue team, which in my eyes is really valuable because anytime that Vue updates, they have to account for those plugins no matter what, because they're built by them. Whereas with something like React or Svelte, they don't have those. So when the React team updates something, they're not obligated. Now they usually do, but they're not obligated to tell the other the first part or the third party plugin teams, like the ones that create the routers and they create the state management libraries, to update. Or the other thing is that a different library could come up and this library could close down. So the one that you've been using on your enterprise level project could close down at some point because it just can't compete with someone else, where that won't happen in a first party scenario. So that's why I kind of lean towards Vue over all of these in an enterprise level right now. And I think a lot of people are leaning that way. Vue is a very, very popular framework at this point. I can say it's pretty established. Like, over the last 3 or 4 days, I've talked to a few developers and all of their enterprise level applications are switching to Vue, which is interesting. And it's 3 different developers from 3 different companies. And they were using React before, they were using Angular before, stuff like that. So I think that says a lot about where the industry is going. But it also says a lot about Svelte. Svelte's been around the least amount of time out of all those, but it is pretty mature for where it is in my eyes too. I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I just think that the biggest issue is maybe its biggest strength as well is like how simple it is and how minimal it is. So again, they don't have those first party plugins or the third party plugins. So I did go a deep dive into their plugin infrastructure, and I did find a pretty good third party router, pretty good third party state management library. Nothing wrong with them. People have put a lot of work into them, but I also didn't see that much usage compared to the other ones. So my worry is that if I were to go and invest my time and invest my money into it, what happens if another one comes up? Because maybe they're not the most efficient ones. They're the only ones, essentially. There's only like 1 or 2 routers and I think only 1 state management library. So that would be my worry. And then all the other plugins as well. Like Matt mentioned Cordova recently. Vue has a third-party Cordova plugin, which is actually really cool. So when you have that plugin installed, all you have to do is literally type in an npm run build Cordova command, and it'll create a Cordova project for you with all the infrastructure in place, everything in place. And then whenever you need to update that Cordova project, you just run that command again. And that's it. It's actually, in my eyes, easier to manage a Vue Cordova project than a regular Cordova project, as crazy as it is, because of that building infrastructure.
So does it like do because like when you do a Vue project, you kind of have like a manifest, if you will, with like you name the project and stuff like that. Does it pull in that information into the Cordova project as well? It's not just calling it like my first app or whatever it's called.
Yes, it does do that.
Wow, that's pretty good.
It's pretty good. And you have some leeway on that. Like you can actually set it yourself.
Right.
Because it does go through like a little command line, construction interface.
Is there like a lot of limitations, or is it just like you just build your app, whatever the heck you want, and then you just literally run that npm, run Cordova or whatever, build Cordova, and then that's it?
So, okay. I was going to say there's no limitations, but there is one limitation, or not really a limitation, but there's one caveat. With Cordova, I don't want to deep dive into Cordova or anything, but with Cordova, you have to do that app initialization event listener.
Yeah.
There's a custom event listener that you have to listen for Cordova, but you're able to do that because you've installed this plugin. Vue actually gives you an event listener to do. So any of your specific Cordova code that ties into Cordova plugin specifically, that's the only time you really need it, the event listener. If you have a Cordova plugin, you can still use it because this plugin gives you the event listener inside of Vue. So that's the only caveat. That's the only thing I had to kind of change because I did use a few Cordova plugins. One for, I think, barcode scanning and the other for like offline storage or something. I can't remember now, but regardless, I did use some of them. But everything else is 100% compatible. Everything works just fine. Like I haven't found any downfalls, essentially, which is kind of surprising to me. So again, why I was talking about this was because Svelte doesn't have that. Like Svelte doesn't have a Cordova plugin right now. Now, Cordova is a niche thing, fairly niche, but it's pretty popular, but it's niche anyway in my eyes. So maybe that's not a huge deal for most, like 99% of people out there right now that are listening, especially to this. But for me, that's a kind of an indication of, okay, so I'm going to have to build pretty much any little thing that I don't find, which is a problem. So that, other than that, like really, Svelte is closer to vanilla.js than any other framework. It is, in my eyes, if you're going to be learning from scratch, like if you're going to be learning a development method from scratch, you should still learn vanilla.js first anyway. So Svelte isn't really a way to learn reactive frameworks without learning JavaScript. I think you should still learn regular JavaScript, build a couple pages with just, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. And then if you want, then you can use Svelte as a stepping stone, or you can go on into, if you're more confident, you can go on into any of the other frameworks. That's just fine too. So that's where I see Svelte kind of breaking down a little bit in my eyes. Like I see the fits, like a few fits, but I don't see it being a major player in the game right now.
Do you think that it's lack of maturity? Like Svelte is newer than VueJS even, and VueJS is new in the grand scheme.
I think yes, lack of maturity is a big, big part of it. But I think the fact that Vue handles things a little bit more corporate in my eyes. It is open source. It's developed by a team. It's not managed by one single company, just like Svelte, right? Which is what the big thing of Svelte. But it has those first-party app plugins, and it has the first-party support, and it has like that team behind it that is dedicated to building features on top of Vue and optimizing Vue and stuff like that. Whereas Svelte is still one guy, from what I understand. They might have a small team here and there, but I'm not 100% sure. The last I've heard, it's still one dude. So again, that would be my hesitation for picking it. Now, I'm not, again, like you said, maturity. If a year down the line, they have everything, nailed down, they have a team, they're very, respondent and all that, I could see Svelte developing into something cool, because writing Svelte code is actually really awesome. Like, actually, the syntax of Svelte, I would say, is better than all of them, because it's so close to native JavaScript. It's so close to all that. Like, it's just like you're writing regular JavaScript code with a few little caveats, and that's it. So I like that a lot. That's probably my favorite part about Svelte, is writing the code.
That's probably where the limitations come from, right? Is because it's so minimal that they're, with every decision possibly in the design of it, they're literally saying, do we add, X component? Do we add X functionality? Or do we not need that? Because that's going to add bulk. Everything adds bulk.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an okay platform to take. Like I said before, there's some people or some companies that want a bare bones framework, and maybe that's what they're aiming for. Maybe they're aiming for those companies that just want something that just works a good base and then to build on top of it, because there is demand for that. Maybe that's all they're going to be. So, and that's okay. And that's probably a pretty big market, maybe bigger than I think it is. But for me right now, I'm all about speed, and with a 1-man team or a 2-man team, building every little component is just not feasible. As far as I can see, like I need to have good third party and especially good for first party support before I can commit to anything at this point. So that's where I land with Svelte, is I'm not convinced that they have that. I could be wrong, and I would love to be proved wrong by anyone out there. Like, just let me know if you're a huge Svelte guy or girl. Attack me at me on Twitter.
Excuse me. The line is hit me up on Twitter.
Hit me up on Twitter, yeah. But other than that, I think that's about it. I will say that I will be doing a companion piece on this. Just watch out for that. It'll probably come out on Medium and on dev.to. It'll have a little bit more of a depth in dive on the syntax differences between Vue and Svelte specifically. So just check that out. You'll see some code in there and stuff like that. Other than that, I don't know about you, Matt. Do you want to move on to the web news?
I'd say web news. Yeah, I think that's a good overview on Svelte.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I think one of the first times that we're going to, well, not one of the first times, but one, like, very rare occasion where we're going to be doing actual news in the web news. MPM purchased by GitHub/Microsoft. Now, this has happened a few weeks ago, which is weird to say at this point. Like, I feel like time has been moving completely differently. So it was only like 2 weeks ago that this happened, but it feels like 2 months. But it did happen. They purchased.
I have a brief question for you, actually, about the time thing before we move on from time. Do you feel weird when people message you about regular things now? Somebody was messaging me and being like, man, I kind of want to pick this up. And I'm like, oh, okay. Is the shop going to be open? Are you going to be allowed to use it? Is your house going to be there? Like,
yeah.
Like those are my questions. And other people are like, man, like, I want to pick this up. I want to buy this, or like, regular shooting the shit. And I'm just like, but I'll probably be dead. So like, why are you talking to me?
Well, okay, no, I don't have that kind of pessimism, but
I don't know.
It is weird to plan normal things. Yeah, it's weird. It's even weird to it was weird to write these podcast notes because it's a normal thing. So I'll say that, but I think it's important to do that.
It's weird that we're not as effective as we are. Like I was saying to Mike, that there's been times when work is busy where I won't leave the house for like 3 days. Now this lockdown really hits me on the weekend because I usually go out on the weekend and stuff. But during the week, I work from home, and then like my hobby is video games and such. And short of like going out for dinner with my girlfriend, I'm usually home anyway at night. So my time at home, it feels weird because I'm not affected. And I think that actually almost makes it more weird. Now, I'm not in the other person's shoes, so I can't really say that. But like, it's weird. Like, I feel like I should, if I was being affected by the pandemic more directly, I think I'd be busy dealing with it. Whereas I'm not busy dealing with it, and that's what's weird, I think.
I don't know, because busy dealing with it, like, if you're affected, you're laid off probably, right?
Or like, so I mean, if I was sick, I would be
you
like,
can't
really,
look for a job.
Really, like, seriously. Well, yeah, that's another thing.
So you're laid off. Like, just picture that situation. So yeah, maybe if you're sick, you're right. If you're actually sick, but again, you're sick. Most people are gonna experience very light sickness. So you're just locked in a house with like the lowest, like a flu.
There's probably been a bunch that thought it was literally a flu. And it probably like ripped through their household, and it didn't even.
Yeah. Exactly, like a cold or something, and that's why I think the numbers are so underinflated and stuff like that. But still, like, if you're a person that just got laid off, you're affected by the coronavirus, you can't go look for a job, so you're doing nothing. So all you have time to do is think about it. So you're just sitting there and thinking about it, like, because you can't even go out to distract yourself. And then you're worried about your parents maybe getting sick because they're older. You're worrying about your grandparents getting sick because they're older. So you're just worrying. You have nothing to occupy your time with other than like TV and stuff, but you can only watch so much of that. And you can't even work because, again, there's no jobs. So it's not a great place to be in. Like, there's probably going to be a lot of mental health things coming out of this. And you should definitely reach out to your family. You should reach out to, the hotlines, all the hotlines. I don't have any actual like health advice, obviously, to give anyone, but like I'm just saying, you battle through it. Like this is a tough time.
I will say,
feel you.
I will say as one small mental health note before we dive into this web news, because we kind of gone off topic now, but I had those headaches and everything else. Like, and I know other people that have been the same way. They've been reading the articles and just getting like more gloomy and gloomy and gloomy and gloomy and gloomy. And I suspect this is just because at the end of the day, the coronavirus is like this. The coronavirus is the same, but there's so many news articles because there's so many news outlets that it makes it look like it's worse. But in reality, like all the news articles will cover a development, but then there's 60 of those articles. So it looks like a lot happened, but really this happened. Like one thing happened, but there's 60 articles. So then it's like 60 times the doom and gloom. And so I just had to stop doing that. But I will say that like I didn't shower for 3 days. I'll just say this. I didn't shower for 3 days. Horrible. Didn't change my clothes. But I will say that I felt way better, like getting a little normalcy. Like I have a really dirty neck beard at the moment, which looks horrible. Like it literally looks like dirt. But like it literally looks like dirt. But I had a shower, did a normal like day, like I had a normal work day and stuff, and then I just like did some video calls, which I've never done for personal reasons my entire life, and that helped.
Yeah, it did help.
It did actually help, like a lot.
So that's why I think bringing normalcy into your day, bringing that routine back, and like this whole thing started with you saying like it's weird that someone would mention a normal thing to you. I think that is important. Like I think you should look ahead. You should look, and like if you want that TV or whatever it is, you should think about it a little bit. Like bring that normalcy back to your life a little bit. This will end. This will be over at some point, and normal life will begin again. I think your advice was good. Stay off the media. Bring your routine back. That's
follow instructions. Follow the government instructions.
Follow government instructions. I mean, there is a caveat to that, I think, in some places. Like if you're listening to this in a place where following instructions is a little bit dangerous. I'm not going to name any countries right now, but there are a few there that are being pretty haphazard about this.
Well, in Canada, I'm going to say
Canada,
from a Canadian perspective,
yeah,
I'm reading the Canada website, and then I'm shutting off the Corona news as much as I can after that. Because I was just sent 3 articles about old people dying in my area.
Yeah.
So that's really great. So now I'm just more depressed when, like, if I didn't know about that, nothing would have changed in my situation anyway. So now I'm just more depressed. So that's it.
Yeah.
So good.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Stay off the media. All right. With that, let's talk about the news.
You son of a bitch.
NPM purchased by GitHub and Microsoft. It's an interesting topic. Like honestly, NPM is a big package manager, right? It's a node package manager. Almost everything that I do now is tied to NPM, which is interesting. Like before, maybe 2 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. I almost didn't use NPM at all, but now I use it on a daily basis for multiple different packages, like Vue, for instance. We were just talking about it, or even Svelte, I believe. They're NPM packages, and on top of that, there's a lot of all their plugins are managed by NPM. So any plugin that I install for Vue is managed by NPM, so it does affect me. That's for sure. So essentially, what happened now is that Microsoft bought GitHub. They created VS Code, I think, before they bought GitHub, but regardless, VS Code, which is a big dominant IDE in the web development space, as well as other spaces at this point. And now they've bought NPM. So they're becoming a giant in our industry, directly affecting us. But they're also doing good things for the most part. So they are embracing open source. So they're leaving NPM open source, just like it was. VS Code is an open source application, and GitHub has remained, if not become better at open source. And they remember when they bought GitHub, the big thing that they did was they allowed people to have private repositories on GitHub, which is something they didn't do before unless you paid. So it's free private repositories, which is a cool thing. And they've only been bringing new and better features to it. And same with VS Code. Like VS Code is one of those apps that I am surprised that it's updated so frequently with so many useful features. Like on a consistent basis, at least once a month, I'll be using VS Code. and I don't read their like daily, like their weekly blogs or whatever that they post about their features, and I'll be using it and I'll notice a new feature that I didn't know before, and that was just recently updated, and that actually improves my workflow, which is cool. So on the one side, really cool, like Microsoft's doing a really good job at embracing these companies and making them better and allowing them to operate as they were with more funding, essentially, which is great. On the other hand, then this is the question. This is what's leading into the question. Is it good for a company like Microsoft or whatever to own so many essential services that we rely on a daily basis? Like, for instance, there's another example of this, Chrome and Google. Chromium, the Google browser platform, is now on Microsoft. Like, Microsoft's Edge is in Chromium and Chrome. And I believe Opera switched to Chromium as well. Yeah. So really all that's left is Firefox, which has its own engine, and Safari, which has its own engine. So it's just Google, the dominant one, Firefox, the one that is not relevant at this point, really. Like, it's sad because they are pretty good.
Well, I think they etched themselves out a little niche in the developer market. Like, I do use Firefox Developer Edition.
I agree with that, but like that niche is so small. Like, it's
as small as all these other things we would talk about, like Svelte and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it might be bigger
than that, but yeah, it's bigger than that. But still, like, it's still really small. And unfortunately, like, the big thing is with browsers before, where if a feature was going to go through, it had to go through all these different browsers. So like, if you're going to implement CSS Grid, you got to implement them through all these different browsers, and all these different browsers had say in how to implement it. So they all would get together to a certain degree and figure out a way to implement it the best way for all of them. There's positives of that being like, okay, so now you can have a more defined feature and more opinionated features where, like, now Chromium owns the market. If they want a feature pushed and they just push a feature to Chromium without even consulting anyone, the other people just have to, like, quickly, oh my God, what's going on? And they have to catch up. Which sucks for them, and it sucks for feature development in the future, because if Safari pushes a feature, maybe someone cares, and maybe Chromium will develop that feature. But if Firefox pushes a feature, Chromium's not going to care. Chromium's not going to adapt. So it's a little bit weird. Like, it becomes a situation where one is like a monopoly. It's essentially creating a monopoly where, sure, Chrome is great and good for the most part. Like, it has its disadvantages, like memory management and stuff. But for the most part, it's great. But what happens when it's not? And it owns the market. Like, no one can do anything about it. So it's the same. Why I'm saying this is that I think this applies to the Microsoft thing. Like, they're great right now. Well, what happens when they're not? Like, what happens if a CEO comes in, like, we're locking everything down, everything's paid now, and they own the market? Then you pay.
Well, this happened with a lot of stuff. This has happened with, not necessarily locking it down, but people have disagreed with, for example, VMware. People have disagreed with VMware, how they handle their VM licensing in the past, because there's been, various changes that people disagree with that, and that's sort of a very industry standard type thing. And there's other things like VirtualBox, and I'm sure some others, but in reality, VMware, is, and I don't know, I haven't really followed them as of recent years, but I know that years ago it was absolutely a standard, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's still a standard today. So you're kind of stuck. But this comes into play with my ecosystem thing that I mentioned, several episodes ago, where what really sucks is, so for example, I use the Google Home for all my smart home stuff, but I can't add anything to my calendar because I use my Microsoft account for all my calendar and email. So in order to do that, I have to have an Amazon Echo with a Microsoft account connected to do that. So now I have two virtual assistants. I have smart speakers all over the damn place. Like, this is like, it's out of control. And you could say, well, move everything over to the Alexa. Sure, but then I get less conversational stuff, and I use a bunch of stuff on Google that I couldn't use on the other thing. Like, I have Google Nest Hubs with the screens. I'm not going to give up all that just because I'm going to, like, switch over to another thing from my calendar. So by having everything under one roof, in this case Microsoft, you sign in with a Microsoft account to everything, and your Microsoft account is a portal, in our case, to our communication, which is Teams, and email. It's a portal to our contacts and calendar, which is, obviously very closely tied to email. It is a portal to our one of our backup solutions, which is OneDrive, one of our file transfer solutions, which is OneDrive. It is a portal into our GitHubs. It is a portal into our VS Code. It is a portal into all of that. It is our Microsoft account is also a portal into logging into our computers, minus your MacBook there. So, I mean, what we pay for with vulnerability, we get convenience out of, but you are correct in that it is, if they actually monopolize, and this is the same with any industry and any company, they can get stagnant or say, okay, we own the market, let's just jack the price up. This is a classic no competitor like thing. Could you imagine if WordPress were the only way to make a site for a consumer? The only way for a consumer to have access to a CMS? WordPress probably wouldn't be open source. WordPress would probably be $100 a month or something. This is why these enterprise CMSs, some are free, sure, certainly, but for the most part, they're extremely expensive. And when I say extremely expensive, I mean $5,000 to $7,000 US a month is not unheard of. Oftentimes that includes the actual company managing it as well. So there's like some service fees in there, of course. A lot of it is, but even still, how much are you, if you're a customer, how much are you paying your WordPress admin? Like $100 a month, maybe $1,000 if it's a big site. But the enterprise CMS is sort of a more locked down area. They have less reach, but they only reach for the big customers. And so that's just an example of what we could see if, in this case, GitHub and everything else is very widespread, but Microsoft owns all of it, right? Whereas these enterprise CMS have less reach, but they own all of their chunk, all of their piece of the market, and they have very few competitors, very few people coming after them. Microsoft has people currently coming after them with different frameworks and different tools and stuff like that, but they're slowly gobbling them up. I love it because I like signing into everything on my Microsoft account. I'll be honest with you. I like doing that. I do that on my Cineplex app, whatever, right? But I can still see the concern for, certainly. What if, right now I buy pretty much every subscription Microsoft has to offer. I pretty much own it for the most part from a consumer perspective. Game Pass, Xbox Live, Office 365. We have Office 365 Business, everything. So, whether it's the business paying for it or me paying for personal stuff, at the end of the day, I own almost all of their subscriptions and I use all of them to death. But what if all of a sudden Game Pass, just if I take it to the consumer side, what if Game Pass becomes garbage and there's no one to fight them? Well, I could certainly drop my subscription, but then I'm losing a large part of my, game collection and such. So now we have the problem of, what do I do? That's the question. What do I do at that point? So I think it's a push and pull, but I also think, to look at the greener side of things, is that with things like Svelte, actually, with things like the fact that you already mentioned a bunch of competitors, Svelte, ReactJS, Angular, the other one, VueJS, you mentioned. These are all people that said, okay, I'm done with this, because these are creators, these are developers, they're creators. And they said, I'm sick of this. And they'll go and do something else. Look at GitLab. GitLab is I never heard of GitLab I heard of it, but I never saw anyone share GitLab a thing in my life until last year. I never really heard of GitLab that much. I don't have my ear to the pulse of that infrastructure all that much. I wasn't reading the news every day, but I've heard the name, but that was it. I never knew anything about it. Now I have a GitLab account. Bitbucket is a competitor. So I think in terms of the developer sphere, we're insulated from the monopolization to an extent, because there will always be someone like Brackets. Brackets is still out there. That's an IDE. We're in the creator sphere. Someone's gonna create if you take it to the consumer level, someone's gonna create another YouTube channel and do it better than you or do it different than you. It's literally just to that degree.
Yep, that's true. For every single one of the things that they bought, VS Code, NPM, GitHub, there are competitors still, which is good. And there are good competitors. Like Yarn is the competitor to NPM, for instance.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a good one. A lot of people like Yarn a lot better than NPM, which is fair. So there are still major competitors, but so I think we are good. Like I think we are safe. And I think as far as Microsoft is right now, they're doing a very good job at promoting the applications that they buy rather than stifling them and adding monetization into them. Unnecessary monetization, I should say. Like adding monetization is fine in my eyes, obviously. Like get something back from your products, but
yeah, they invested in these things. Yeah,
exactly. Like they got to get something back, but adding unnecessary monetization, stealing user data too much, like they don't do that as much as I thought they would when they were first started buying all these companies. But that's not to say like I'm fully convinced that 5 years down the line they won't do that. Like for instance, NPM right now, any public package on NPM is free. I wouldn't put it past them in the next few years to add a paid tier to NPM packages,
so that people are effectively selling apps,
like
if you will.
Store. Yeah, like a store on the NPM. I'm not going to say that's going to happen. I hope it doesn't. In fact, let me just. I think there are instances of that happening right now where NPM does have some paid packages through a, but I don't think it's.
Well, one of the things they did from the consumer sphere, and I'm sure people have seen this, is they've added a full store to Minecraft. Microsoft purchased Minecraft, and yes, the console version of Minecraft had certain paid things that the PC Java version didn't, like skins and stuff like that. But there's actually like a full out like Minecraft store now, and there's people making it in like little, I don't want to say apps, but they're making shirts and stuff like that, skins, and they're selling it for the Minecraft coin, which is a digital premium currency. Yeah.
So that may be the way that they're going for it right now. I don't see any like paid NPM apps right now or NPM packages, so it's possible there aren't.
It could also be a part of their infrastructure plan though, because Minecraft is very much a consumer product. These are very much not consumerized. These are very much developers, so there could be a totally different plan where they're going to try to push us to make things for their platforms. Like they might be trying to make us, or maybe if they get everyone on VS Code and then they themselves make a plugin for VS Code for various languages that automatically, like that Cordova thing with Svelte or with VueJS, that automatically packages it for the Microsoft store. Like these guys might be locking down and being like, okay, let's maybe not force the people, but let's make it so that it's so easy to publish to the Microsoft store that you'd be a fool not to use that distribution channel. Like why not get an extra 10 downloads?
Exactly. So maybe that's where they're going to go with it. I'm hoping not. I hope they continue with what they're doing. I know one big feature that they're going to be migrating from. So NPM has paid versions where you can have private packages. So you can, for your company, have a package that only your company can access.
Right. Makes sense. Yep.
Okay. And you have to pay monthly for that privilege. I know right now they're saying they're going to fully support that and all, et cetera, but they are planning on moving that to GitHub. So they want to use a GitHub, some sort of GitHub version of that. And I don't know what it is because I don't use any of that. GitHub Security Lab, I think, or something like that. Anyway, regardless, that's one of the changes that they want to make. I don't know if there's any other big changes that they want to make, but that's one. I don't know if anyone uses those packages. Let us know how they are. But that's not a big change. Like that's not a huge deal because I'm pretty sure the GitHub version is essentially the same. Like it's a private repository, with a way to install it automatically with NPM or something like that.
Right.
So as long as the functionality is the same, I don't see a big deal. Hopefully they keep it the same. But other than that, I don't know. Like that's pretty much it. I think my final thoughts are I'm optimistic that Microsoft will continue down the same path that they are continuing down in terms of developing the companies that they buy. Yeah. And I'm with you on I like logging in with one account into all my different services. I do think that's convenient. And the other side of it is that there are competitors that are good. So it's not a monopoly yet.
And I don't think I don't think it ever can be. I think it's literally a matter of some guy, some developer says, I'm sick of this, and this is like the story, right? Always, I'm sick of this, or I think I can do this better, and he just goes, builds it for a few months or a few years, comes out, bam, there's a competitor.
Yep. I think in our industry especially, that's more of a thing than any other industry. So I think that's a good point. It's a really good point, and I think you are right where we're a little bit advantageous in that sense, where if someone really gets pissed off, they will build something better and they will have help doing it. Like they'll open it up and people will build on top of that, and that happens every day.
Because the consumer angle cool. is like, if someone's pissed off at how Minecraft runs, a consumer, chances are they're not a developer, let alone a game developer, so they're not going to be able to make a Minecraft clone, right, or a Minecraft competitor. But here we're talking about creators, so. Do you have anything else to add? Do you think it's that? I think that's literally went silent. So I think we've kind of finished off. Just
a big old moment of silence right there. I think we did it. I think we finished off this topic, and hope you enjoyed the one of the first news articles that we actually had on Web News.
Yeah, it's usually just a big editorial, eh? Jeez. Yeah. But anyway, I'd like to mention before the conclusion that I am going to be looking at our code challenge entries. I wish it was with an S. I'm going to be looking at our code challenge entry for the vanilla slider code challenge, I believe I called it. I'm going to take a look at that, and might mention it on next episode, but keep tuned to our social media, because we'll be taking a look and possibly posting about that as well. So we didn't forget about that, just COVID panic made us delay that a little bit. So anyway, thank you for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can follow us on the socials via @HTMLAllTheThings. That's on Facebook and Instagram. You can also follow us on Twitter. That's @HTMLEverything. We are on Medium, and we're on GitHub. Can't speak. And we're also on Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTMLAllTheThings. Check out the tiers and give that a go. And many thanks to our $3 tier patron, Sean from RabbitWorks JavaScript. Find him at youtube.com/RabbitWorksJavaScript. Garrick from Local Path Computing and Web Design. Find him at localpathcomputing.com. Craig, a.k.a. Cosworth. Ryan Gatchell from Blue Black Digital. Find him at blueblackdigital.com. Chris from Selfmade Web Designer. Find him at selfmadewebdesigner.com. Tim from The Web Hacker. Find him at thewebhacker.com. And DL Ford from dlford.io. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform you're listening to this on. And we are signing off.